I should probably say my name is Ashley Bloom. I'm an educational psychologist, for those who don't know me. And Mary, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, so I'm Mary Trotman. I know quite a few of you, but for those I haven't met, I'm the operations manager for the Children and Young Persons Neurodevelopmental Partnership.
Thanks, Mary. And then we've got Chris, who's going to be helping out with us, and he's an assistant ed psych. So today we're going to be looking at supporting the next steps form process. You can just type in neurodevelopmental next steps forms in Google, and what you'll get to is this form. And then it's at the bottom of this form. You will see, the downloads and neurodevelopmental next steps form, autism and ADHD. And you click on that and you can download the form. Something you've got to be mindful of is that the form's often updated. So if you have downloaded a previous copy, just make sure that you're using the updated copy if you're doing a new assessment.
So on the form, a number of you will have seen in the past, because some of you have been doing this as long as we have, that we used to ask for you guys to tell us whether you wanted us to be looking at autism or ADHD, and those are the conversations that you had already had. We've removed that from the form, and the information in this first section has updated to say that that we're not, it could be autism and or ADHD that we're looking at. And on version 4, that is the case. We're on version 4 at the moment. Version 3 and 4, I think, were they without choosing autism and ADHD as a tick box. I think what's really important about that is that we may still only look at one of those areas depending on the evidence that has been sent through. So we will consider all the information and evidence that's come through from this and from obviously then our initial appointment with them and etc. etc. We may only assess for one thing, but the other would have been taken into account and would have been assessed had there been enough information for that, had there been enough evidence that was a reasonable thing to do. So don't worry about whether the information that you guys are sharing is autism specific or ADHD specific. It's just about sharing information. So we'll work through the why. It's just about what you see, and that's what we really want to understand. So the next bit, obviously, this is, again, we don't split out where the GPs go anymore. They all come into us now again. So don't worry about that section. That will remove that one. So, because again, for those of you that have been doing it for a really long time, it used to be that East Mendip had its own, it went to somewhere different. It went up to the Baines group, but now we see all the young people of Somerset. So the demographics for us are really important. So the next section is really important for us. If we haven't got that information, we do have to track that down. So it's really helpful if you guys can share that information. It's something that our NHS systems insist on being inputted when we put somebody on to the system, and they're quite strict about that in the NHS. So that's really, really helpful. And knowing the place of education is helpful too. The other thing that would be really helpful for us in the bit above, sorry, Ash, if you go back up a second. So to here, where it says place of education, if you know that you're submitting a form for a young person that is at your school in the summer of year 6 and you know where they're going, it would be really helpful if you could write in that box the type of education provider, right in there, moving to, and say which school that they're going to be going, so that when we do the Google Doc form, we're able to get the right school. And that's really, really helpful. So thank you. And lots of young people will change schools. We know that. We know it's not ever going to be foolproof, but it would just help. So then it comes on to the parent carer details, and making sure that we've got all the information. One of the things we do have to do is we have to have information from parents, obviously, as part of the assessment. If parents are separated, we need to have information from both parents. Now, we'll do that through our assessment, so it's not for you guys to worry about, but it's really helpful to know, because if parents are, if one parent is representing the family with the young person, then that's different. But if parents are separated, then we need to make sure that the voice of both parents, if they've got joint PR, are given the opportunity to be heard. Okay, to the next section. And then it's about who's referring. So this bit's interesting. Go back up again. Sorry, Ash. Right, so the referring practitioner, yeah, there. So name of the professionals requesting the assessment. Now, as the SENCO, you may be the professional that's putting in the request, but you are putting this information in on behalf of all the people that have filled out this form. So that doesn't have to just be you guys that completes this form, or is the controller of the document, or has to do all of the legwork. So as the, as the person sending the form in, that is, you are the person requesting and agrees that the information and what's been demonstrated in the graduated response is that it would be suitable for this young person to be considered for an assessment for autism or ADHD based on all the information that you have at your hands. And that goes for whoever else is putting this form in. So that's exactly what we say to CAMS, that's exactly what we say to SIPs, all the other professionals who do the referring practitioners. So these are the services that we want to know if they're involved, and it's great to have the contact details of those young people, those people that have dealt with the young people as well, and then in health as well. Often we'll know once they get to us if speech and language and occupational therapy have been involved. If they're based in the NHS, the reason why that's really helpful is that lots of our young people will see speech and language therapists or occupational therapists that have been commissioned in a different way. So whether they've been commissioned through services through education, or they've actually been private OTs and physios and speech and language therapists, it's always really, really helpful for us to know that. And again, other agencies and social care is always really helpful as well, if you know it. So we need to have consent from the young person. Ideally, we'd like consent for all the young people, even if it's, sort of a case of we've spoken to this 6-year-old about this, and they understand why we've had to make some adaptations in school, and they understand so the parents have been on the How to Talk to My Young Person About Neuro diversity workshop through Wise Up, and this young person has good understanding of why they may sort of have differences and need support, and are happy to come in for the assessment. A comment along those lines or a tick box for that would be really, really helpful. Obviously, for any young person of secondary school age, it's really important that they sign the consent and they have actively taken part in that consent. Again, that might have to be adapted for for different cognitive abilities, and it may be that you have to think about how you've had those conversations, how families had those conversations, and again then about you saying this young person understands this to their ability, and they're consenting to this assessment.
And those discussions are ongoing, aren't they?
Yeah.
So we follow up when parents and children come into the clinic, and we continue to look at consent. So it's kind of an ongoing process, isn't it? Which is, I always think is quite helpful.
Yeah.
It's really difficult, I think, for young people to understand what they're signing themselves into at some stages.
Yes. So the next section is about whether they want to have it or not. I mean, that's as simple as that, and whether you sort of complete this yourself, and you can say yes, you have had a conversation, no, we do not, you don't want to, or no, we don't think you need to. Do you want the neurodiversity assessment, and then sort of yes or no. Interestingly, the conversation about the assessment varies, and like Ash was saying then, it's ongoing. And what we will pull apart very clearly, and this happens a lot, and we're very used to this, is that a young person may say they don't want to have the assessment, but in the moment it's because they don't want to be in clinic. And we can pull that apart quite easily. as in they'd rather be, I don't know, at home doing something else, or they've been promised a McDonald's after their assessment, which lots to do, and they want to just they just want to go. They don't want to be taking part in the assessment. And quite rightly, there's you know, sort of I can understand, you know, sort of that feeling of the young person. That isn't a reason to not want an assessment. What we're trying to make sure that our young people understand, and parents are really good at supporting their young people to understand, is what the benefits are to that assessment. And we can support parents in having those conversations in clinic, but it's also, parents have been to the understanding neurodiversity workshops, but also within the anxiety workshops as well. So all of the Wise Up work that's available for families can help with those conversations. So if a young person was to say to us, for example, I don't want a diagnosis of autism and I have these reasons why I don't want it, then we don't proceed with the assessment. However, if what they're saying is, I just don't want to be here for the next 2 hours because I can't be bothered, I don't want to be in this room, and I don't want this, and I don't want that, then we have to make reasonable adjustments to make that work. Because what they're not actually saying no to is an assessment for autism. What they're saying no to is the room, the environment, or maybe us. But we have to work through that. So those are two very different things. And I think we need to make sure that young people aren't saying they don't want the assessment because they're afraid of what the assessment includes. So we can support you guys in that if that's something that you're finding is a bit more of a challenge.
I always think there's a useful question in the first part when parents are going through this process is they have a developmental assessment where you'll have a clinician who calls them and talks them through and explores more about their early history. And I always think it's really useful because there's a point in that where you can find out if it's likely that a young person will struggle in the clinic. So at that point, that is useful information that we can then bring back and say, well, actually, having a special interest, you know, whatever special interest is within the clinic can help them feel at ease or talk about that thing. So if the earlier we can find out about this sort of stuff, I think the better it is to help them feel at ease, and we kind of can explore them rather than having to manage the anxiety, you know, previously.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ash, I'll leave you to do the next couple of bits.
Yeah, sure. So if you have answered yes, why would you like a neurodiversity assessment? This is an interesting one, I think, because we've kind of changed, I think, our approach to this in clinic fairly recently, haven't we? I think the approach, as far as I'm understanding things now, Mary, please correct me if I got things wrong here, is that we are very much interested in how life is feeling significantly more difficult than it otherwise would, and how the impact on the young person's experiences play out. So we are interested in exploring the kind of the identity of the young person and how the assessment process of receiving and of how a diagnostic of autism or ADHD would help that young person to feel that they can understand themselves better. So part of what happens when they go through this process is a kind of taking a picture of this person and trying to understand what makes their brain different, what makes their behavior different, and how does it play out. But the move has been one towards identity. Would you say that's fair, Mary, rather than I think as opposed to a needs? It's not there's something difficult specifically. It's around about thinking about how those differences make impact on that young person's experiences and their identity. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say from a, you know, sort of if we're stripping it right back to being sort of as a sort of a simple explanation, the one thing we would say is that it's not about having an assessment so you know what the young person's needs are or what their needs are, because you guys are perfectly capable of looking at, you know, sort of stripping back what support and things could be put in place, and we can support families in doing that to the best of our ability as well, with, you know, sort of with all the work that's available out there. However, if then a young person goes on to wanting to know why they need those adaptations, why is it about them that they need those interventions, and making sure that they have a positive understanding as to why the world isn't set up to understand them and why they need to have all this support there now and moving forward, because this is our lifelong diagnosis. We have to be really cautious that we are supporting our young people to understand themselves now and for the rest of their lives. And so the needs will be in place. Their needs will be identified and the support put in place. What we then need to be doing is the young people that want to know why they need to have that support in place and why their neurodiversity affects them in the way that it does. That's the next step, and that's who we are, hence the next steps for.
And I think the key there is it's helping them to see, or helping parents to see that this isn't about getting additional provision as such. So the path towards diagnosis isn't so that additional things can be set up for them. It's so the young person can help themselves understand themselves better. There shouldn't be. We've done quite a few talks around this and in the past around things like reasonable adjustments, and there's a myth busting document as well. Actually, Chris, would you mind pasting that link in the chat as well? So the myth busting document that we did talks about what are the common misconceptions or perceptions that people might have around seeking a diagnosis and what that means in practice. So the diagnosis itself, it's worth reminding us all that it doesn't lead to anything significantly more in terms of provision. It's about helping the young person understand themselves. So that's a useful, this is especially useful in terms of things like the EHCP. So a diagnosis won't help the family get an EHCP. Where it can help, apart from the fact that it can help the young person with their, say, identity, it can help if there's thoughts of a specialist school. Some specialist settings will request that a young person has a diagnosis, but those are a minority in terms of
and often they are there is sort of a caveat of other things alongside that. So none of our specialist those are often the maintained independent specialist provisions, and often outside of the county, so they're quite specific, and there is still often a caveat of or evidence of or needs identified that would be in line with. So it's getting incredibly rare now for that to hinge, sort of to be hinged on a diagnosis, and there are a number of reasons for that, and we can talk about those further on as well.
Okay. Do you have any worries about having a neurodiversity assessment? Some of these things are quite useful, aren't they, to discuss with a young person beforehand as to what that's going to feel like. I think, Mary, am I right in saying we've now got a video, or there is a video coming of what
the video's coming? So the video's coming, and there is going to be a video as well of what to watch for the young people to watch before they agree to the assessment, and in a sort of, this is why we think it's the right time, or why sort of your teachers or your SENCOs or your parents or anybody in your life thinks it's the right time, and this is what it's about, and sort of that giving them sort of the ability to understand that or ask any questions, and I think this will be sort of animated, short, and hopefully quite snappy, especially for our young people with ADHD. We'll get it as short and succinct as possible, and hopefully we'll be able to support in these answers. So again, all of this comes back to, we want young people to feel that they have the control and the power to say when they want an assessment, but equally to not say no to an assessment because they're worried about what an assessment will contain. So it's about making sure that although we're giving young people the power of consent, which is absolutely right, we are ensuring that it's informed consent and they're making the right decisions for the right reasons.
Anything else you'd like to say? You may also wish to share a link. Is that a helpful one, Mary? Do people often put things on there? Is that like an additional?
Yeah, occasionally, and it's often more about so in there we get more information from our older young people. So and lots of our sixth formers will put the information in there, and that's a box that we have on our adult form. So that's something that would transfer straight over to adults if they were still on our waiting list at the point where they turn into an adult.
Okay, so this is information from parent carers and practitioners. Okay, so why do you think the young person needs a neurodiversity assessment? How do you hope it will be helpful?
So again, that comes back down to the things that we were talking about then. So why would it be helpful? So it's really important for us to see what it is about the young person's presentation that you think, or you and parents, because obviously you're filling out this app together, how you all collectively feel that the young person would benefit from an assessment. So everything's in place, everyone's meeting the needs, we're hearing all, sort of all these brilliant things that are happening and the strategies that are in place. What is it about the young person and their presentation that you believe an assessment would be helpful for? So, and that's as a collective. So then
this bit's really important, isn't it?
Yeah.
What has been done to support the young person? What has been most effective?
So what's really important here isn't well, it is what's been put in place, but actually how it's worked. So we don't want sort of masses and masses of information in each section, but just bullet points of what's been put into place without saying how that helped can be quite difficult, because obviously lots of these things can be done and lots of these things can be put into place for lots of young people for lots of reasons. And what's really important is that we can see how somebody's neurodiversity how their needs or their challenges, their hurdles, if you like, and sometimes how their strengths were utilised would be really helpful for us to then hear the impact that had and how that had a positive impact on the young person, and sort of the plans to keep that going. And sort of it would be really really helpful to hear that in that section.
There's how this also, because I'm thinking in terms of how you can save yourselves time in terms of when you're doing this. The idea, sometimes it might not materialize, but the idea is that this information will hopefully be accessible anyway. So when you're doing your typical PDR, when you're following the Somerset graduated response, these are the types of information which will be naturally explored through that process. So rather than having to specifically, there will be instances when absolutely school and parent is going to differ on these, so it's going to be more difficult in those circumstances. Most of the time, the hope is that the information that you're collecting through those processes can be essentially copied and pasted into this section, so you're not having to then do additional work for this. It should be a matter of looking at what has been put in place, what is the impact, and then copy and paste it onto there. It's really important because in the part of the diagnostic process, there's where we're exploring whether or not to diagnose it. It talks about functional impact. So that is in terms of how does what is the impact of their needs essentially in practice on their lives. How is that positively affected them? How is it negatively affecting them? So that's why we need this information. We're looking at impact, but we need to be able to see that things have been put in place to support that young person so that we can work out the levels of that functional impact.
And I also want this can be anybody. So it doesn't have to be, sort of an LSA working with the young person daily can report, could write, could eat. You can actually fill that section out in terms of, in the mornings I do this, and this is what makes the difference. So these strategies and support strategies don't have to be things like FIS or educational psychology or PFSA. They don't have to be those bigger examples. They can be some really bespoke neurodivergent support mechanisms that an LSA in the classroom may well be doing on a daily basis. And again, they don't have to link that to something specific. So we're not asking people to have a full understanding why things work. Sometimes we just know that things work for certain young people. It's for us to pick apart what part of their neurodivergent profile that their reasoning and like Ash said, for us to move into, sort of whether a diagnosis is appropriate. However, people working on a daily basis with a young person that knows that they do X, Y, and Z, and the result is that they, that they're by knowing exactly what's going to happen and me sticking to the plan or anything, so I'm using some really simplistic ideas, but literally all they can then do is say that actually on the days when that doesn't happen, it does, our world falls apart. Then things like that are really, really helpful. So we make sure we have that in place. So it doesn't have to be by people that aren't working with the young person day in and day out. It doesn't need to be by you guys. It can be with, whoever is working with the young person regularly, alongside the parents of what they adapt and what they do. And hopefully as well, by having those conversations while filling out this next steps for following all the other things being put into place and all the support being in place, it might be by having that conversation, you suddenly start putting things into place that families do, and vice versa. Families can start putting things into place that are happening in school that are working well. So we're hoping it will facilitate conversations as well.
Background history information.
Yeah, and that's quite happy to have. That's quite helpful to have. And predominantly, obviously, it'll be the parents' information within that.
Let's go down a bit further. Information relating to the young person's possible neurodiversity.
Yeah. So this bit is the section where we have to see that there is some evidence of neurodifference, and we need to understand, sort of what that looks like, both at home and in the education setting and or another setting. So it's sort of whoever's completing this, but for the purpose of this presentation, obviously within the education setting.
These questions are quite helpful, aren't they? I think there's prompts here in the form. By the way, if anyone's got any questions, I know you're all on mute at the moment, but do store them up or write them in the chat, and we will answer them at the end of the question, at the end of our talk. Okay, so peer relationships and friendships. So this is all just detailing the different areas, because when we're exploring whether we're looking at autism, ADHD, we're looking at the diagnostic criteria, and we're essentially seeing how closely it matches up to that criteria. So this helps us just to get a better understanding of that person at this early stage. Is there anything specific that would be helpful within these parts, Mary, to highlight?
And no, I think it's more about what is seen. So, we're just answering those questions, but us hearing what you see or what is seen. So again, this comes back to, it doesn't have to be just gather, sort of taking that section and putting those questions, sort of over to other people working with the young person. This can be compiled by a group of people. This doesn't, all of this information can be gathered over time. What did you see with peers and friendships that originally made you feel like there needed to be support around the peers and friendships, and they started to, sort of go, having interventions or support for that? What was it that was seen? Who saw it? They can answer those questions that can go in here. So all of that information can be built up. This isn't about what you see right now and here. This could be of what you've seen over the time that you've been following a graduated response. So this can be started, this can be picked back up, this can be finished, this can be completed, by a number of different people over a period of time for the referring practitioners' views, ready to be like Ash said, cut and paste into the document once the parents and carers, once you've had a chance to sit down with the parent carers to complete their sections, and you can do all that together.
Is there anything that would be helpful around sensory differences? Is there, because I know different professionals will sometimes use, say, more standardized approaches, some will tend to use more qualitative. Is there a preference in the clinic in terms of?
No, I think so we do understand that there's a lot of overlap when it comes to sensory. So we'd be interested to understand, and to understand what how the young person is presenting. And there are some really obvious ones. They don't like the noise in the hall, or they don't understand, when they're hurting somebody because they're, they get over enthusiastic and are a bit rough, and they're, or they might be, there might be other areas, but equally, it might be that their interoception is poor, so they don't feel emotions building up, and they overreact. So it depends on what you're seeing and what the experience and understanding of that is. But all information is good information. Again, it doesn't need to be a huge amount of it doesn't need to be, a novel on the young person, just some indication of the areas that have been seen. And again, this can be anybody completing this section alongside the parents.
So they don't necessarily have to complete I forget the name of that, like the sensory checklist. It can just be information around that, and it's just what they're seeing, what they've noticed, that kind of pattern.
And yeah, because it's the thing is as well, not every young person experiences every single sensory difference for every single sense that is included within that, about the things we talk about. And some of them are heightened and some of them are lowered and some of them change on a daily basis. It's about what you're seeing that's important. It's the rich information about what, what their teachers are seeing, what the LSAs are seeing, what the lunchtime supervisors are seeing, or what the PE teacher's seeing, what, depending on the age, especially if you have, other people coming into school, what's being seen is really helpful to capture.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Directing and focusing attention. I think this is all along the same sort of lines as what you were talking about there, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. The other thing that's quite interesting is that when there's very differing views from home and school and things like that, it's important to capture that, but also it's important for parents to be able to say, well, they do that, and this is how we get them to do it, or vice versa, or we struggle with that because and because often the things that you'll see are different is because the environments are slightly different, or the support that's being offered is different. So it's important to say what's being done so that we can see, oh, well, that's different because of X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, so this I think is just same sort of stuff here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, is there anything there that we need to discuss, or is that all?
No, I think that's that's it. And we do need signatures though.
Okay, signatures important.
Signatures important. We need to know that everybody wants it.
I think that is everything on the form in terms of what we're going to discuss today. So if we, Chris, if you stop the recording, and then we can unmute and